Welcome students to another module on media and society. If you recall, we had ended with a discussion on the different kinds of research methods in terms of media. Now today what we will do is we will look at the audience behavior and how different philosophies have been used to understand media's effect on the audience. As you know, that the audience is a very integral part, or the public opinion is very important in terms of media. Because without the presence of the public opinion, or the public for that matter, media would cease to exist. So let us start with a brief history as to how the media became mass media. In 1480, we had something called the Gutenberg printing press. This was one of the major inventions of the Industrial Revolution. A part of the Industrial Revolution was also focused on how to transmit information further amongst people. So the Gutenberg press was able to print paper and books as well as other kinds of pamphlets which would become an integral part of circulating information. But however, the concept of the mass media still had not come. The Gutenberg press printed paper and newspapers primarily, which were quite expensive. So they were only relegated to the upper class elite of the European society. The concept of the mass aspect of media, where you have different people easily being able to access media, came in the 1920s with the broadcasting revolution, where you have different networks, different newspapers, and different kinds of information very easily available for everyone's consumption. Before that, we did not really have the spread of the media amongst most people. Now with this also came an interest to understand behaviors of the audience, and different theories of media then look at the behavioral aspects of the audience. We would be starting with the direct effects model. Now media was for the longest time seen with a little bit of suspicion because it was able to influence cultures. Anything which has this mass appeal to control people's attitude is seen always not in a positive light. Hence, the direct effects model believed that after consumption or watching different aspects of the media, say newspapers for that matter, would affect the thoughts and minds of individuals directly. The direct effects model, however, had been criticized by a lot of philosophers later on, who said that human beings are different creatures who have the ability to think on their own. So it is not always correct that tools of mass media, like say the television or the newspapers, can easily tell humans what to do. Humans are different and they derive different kinds of motivations based on their experiences and their culture, which leads them to make decisions on their own. Now we come to the uses and gratifications theory. But before that, let us look at a quiz. So the question is, when was the Gutenberg printing press invented? Was it in 1840, was it in 1450, or was it in 1940? The uses and gratifications theory talks primarily about the different uses different groups of people might have from the media. What do I mean when I say uses which different groups of people might have from the media? Different groups such as say businessmen or politicians or policymakers might have different purposes which they use with terms of the media. Say businessmen, for example, might want to launch a new product. In order to do that, they first have to understand how much of an appeal does that product hold amongst the public. So they might look at advertisements or look at how as advertisements influence people's minds. Politicians, for example, often use mass media or different media channels in order to propagate their thoughts and propaganda. This is not always seen in a very positive light. However, this theory tends to give a kind of power to the public in helping them understand or making them as central figures who are able to make their own decisions rather than the direct effects model. Different groups of people are influenced by different cultures, hence the uses that they derive, say for the purpose of entertainment or for the purpose of relaxation or for emotional support, would be different in terms of media. Some of us scroll through social media just for the sake of it because it relaxes us, because we like looking at different people and what they are doing. Or we might want to keep in touch with what our friends are doing, for example. Or we might also want to read certain interesting articles online. Newspapers, as you know, are also available online nowadays. So, the uses and gratifications theory has also been criticized highly for only targeting certain ideas or looking at it in a very mechanical fashion. Hereby, media is only seen as a kind of a tool which different groups might be using to propagate their own products or to send their own message for that matter. Let us look at now the agenda setting theory. Agenda setting theory talks about how different kinds of agenda are set by media. What do I mean by setting an agenda? The media and its different tools might be used by different groups of people to send a message to us. Say, for example, when the government gives us messages about different kinds of schemes or policies that they are creating for the public of the nation, or say, when you see those smoking advertisements which seem quite gory and disturbing. They are not there to disturb you, but to give you an idea of the ill effects of smoking. So the agenda then of the government or say any policymakers is to educate us on the good and the bad of certain social issues. The government also tells us at times how to be safe in terms of our consumer rights or say how not to invest in any kind of Ponzi schemes. So these agendas are important because they guide us to prevent ill fortunes on part of the public. So, the criticism behind agenda setting theory primarily talk about how the causality or the links between different issues might not be provided easily by researchers. At times, agendas are important for public opinion or to educate the public. If we did not know that mixing alcohol or drunken driving is not a good habit, then we might all think that we can easily get away with having some alcohol and driving. But in order to protect us from fatal accidents, not only ourselves, but say also others who are walking or driving on the road, the government or policy makers would constantly give on advertisements not only in mass media, say newspapers or televisions, but also huge placards or say social media, whereby they will make us aware about the ill effects that we might be causing to ourselves as well as others. Now let us look at another quiz. Which media theory uses different forms of media to influence public policy? Is it A, the direct effects model, B, the agenda setting model, or C, cultivation analysis theory? From here on, we get into a very interesting theory about mass media. And here is where sociology as a discipline is very easily integrated with the discipline of media studies. We look at symbolic interactionism. What do I mean when I use the term symbolic interactionism? Symbols are an important part of our everyday interactions. It is through symbols that we actually interact or communicate messages. Take a minute to think. If you did not know the appropriate word to describe what a cat actually is, how would you explain it to another person? Sometimes in daily interactions, we often use hand gestures or facial movements or body language, but we are able to communicate different messages to those with whom we are interacting. So these form part of a larger culture which is based on symbols. It is very easy for us to understand through symbols because all of us are aware of these symbols. Media has a very strong effect on symbolic interaction. And how do they have such a strong effect? Because the media as an institution is able to create its own set of symbols. These symbols can then be constantly highlighted in the mass media and influence our decision making. So if we constantly keep on seeing advertisement of a particular apparel or clothing, we might be tempted to buy it, even though we might not have any requirements for it, or even though we might not be comfortable in that kind of clothing. This is a very important kind of a gesture. Hence, symbolic interactionism is seen as a very strong influence on media. Symbolic interactionism is also able to create a larger culture which influences public opinion. This we will see in the later model on the positive and the negative aspects of the media. From symbolic interactionism, now we move on to another very interesting theory called the spiral of silence. The name sounds quite interesting and intimidating, doesn't it? Spiral of silence talks about the minorities in a public opinion. Often there is a majority and a minority opinion. When you see polls, public polls for that matter, or opinion polls, which are portrayed primarily, say, before elections or before an important decision is made, these polls only have or only highlight the consensus or the majority opinion. But does that mean that there aren't any opposing opinions? Of course not. There are different kinds of opinions because people come from different cultural backgrounds. So these opposing opinions are often left in the margins and they are not highlighted. It's only the consensus which is highlighted strongly so that we come together as a united front in terms of a public opinion. These silenced aspects which are left in the margins is termed very interestingly the spiral of silence. So, interestingly, often people might disagree with the majority opinion, but they choose to keep silent. Why? Because they fear that if they speak out or if they revolt against the majority public opinion, they might be sidelined or shunned from the larger community. It is very difficult for most people or the majority of the public to appreciate or accept any kind of difference. Hence, people who often do not agree with the majority opinion often take a side step and go with the majority flow. They decide against their voicing of their own opinions and they choose to be a part of the larger community. This is known as the spiral of silence. Now, the spiral of silence has a very important criticism. Often, different cultural aspects which are majoritarian cultural aspects or which are more popular amongst people can be highlighted. But we tend to then dilute the minority opinion and hence think that minorities always will go with the flow. But different people who are not accepting the current situation, say, of their own status, actually might choose to speak out. Because at times, their opinion becomes highly important with regard to their own existence. So, we cannot totally write off the fact that minorities or minority opinion for that matter will always be silenced. So let us look at now cultivation analysis. Cultivation analysis looks at the different kinds of approaches that different media forms might have and lead to a difference in our behaviors. Often the media gives us unrealistic situations. When we look at films, say for example, or when we look at different reality shows, it might influence our sense of what is real and what is illusion. Hence, it is believed that if too much of repetitive, unrealistic images or unrealistic thoughts and motivations are put in front of us, it might actually stunt our own thinking and imagination. Now, this is not a very helpful situation, you see, because it might influence what actually is happening in our real lives to give us a different kind of an illusion that we are living in a very unrealistic kind of a world. A good example of this can be the COVID-19 pandemic, where initially we did not have any idea as to what is happening. So, looking at older films which interpreted a virus spread, or thinking about alien attacks or how the virus is going to bring an end of the human race, was unrealistic expectations which often led us to behave in very chaotic manner. This is why cultivation analysis is thought to have a very strong influence on human minds. However, there has been a strong criticism against cultivation analysis to make us realize that we as humans have our own decision-making capacities. It's not always that we would be thinking of unrealistic or illusory situations. We might actually look at such situations for the benefit of entertainment, and hence are able to distinguish between what is reality and what is entertainment. Now let us come to the final theory of media effects, which is media logic theory. Media logic theory talks about the different kinds of formats that media uses to interpret the world for us. Say for example newspapers, and how every day we have this habit and tendency of looking at newspapers, whether they are in the electronic form in the contemporary society, or they are the physical newspapers which have been present for centuries. We have a tendency to try and first understand before starting our day that what is actually going on in the world. Hence, we turn to these tools of media to help us make sense and connect with the world. Often these formats might be influential in determining how we think what is important and what is unimportant. Hence, media formats also are an important aspects of how we react to the kind of information that is given to us. Now let us look at the final quiz in this module. How many major effects of media theories are there? Is it A, 7, or is it B, 10, or is it C, 5? Now, in conclusion, I would like you all to recall how the different theories of media look at audience behavior. We started with how media was seen as something left only for the elites, and eventually we look at how it became or turned into mass media. Then we looked at how the media was seen with a sense of suspicion, and eventually how interesting ways and manners of behavioral sciences or behaviors were linked with media. Whether it is symbolic interactionism, which uses different symbols to interpret and create a larger culture of media, or say it is the media logic theory, where you have different formats which help us interpret and negotiate our thoughts in terms of media. Media forms a very important aspect of our social lives, and sociology as well as media studies help us determine our decision making. I hope you've had a very good and enlightening module. See you soon.